Classmates, in this lecture, we will continue to study actual model and analyze what happens when two economies, home and foreign, trade in a two-factor model. Focus on the following issues. First, consumptions. Second, relative prices and the pattern of trade. Third, trade and the distribution of income. First, assumptions. Suppose home and foreign are similar along many dimensions. They have the same tastes and therefore have identical relative demand for goods and clothes when faced with the same relative prices of the two goods. They also have the same technology. A given amount of labor and capital yields the same output of either clothes or food in the two countries. The only difference between the countries is in the resources. Home has a higher ratio of labor to capital than foreign does. Assume both capital and labor can move across sector freely, thus equalizing the returns within each country. But capital and labor are not free to move in between countries, so that pre-trade payments to each resources can differ internationally, and there are no transportation costs, no barriers to trade. Second, relative price and the patterns of trade. Since home has a higher ratio of labor to capital than foreign, home is labor abundant and foreign is capital abundant. Note that abundance is defined in terms of the ratio, not in absolute quantities. For example, the total number of workers in the United States is roughly 3 times higher than that in Mexico. But Mexico would still be considered labor abundant relative to the United States. Since the U.S. capital stock is more than 3 times higher than the capital stock in Mexico. Abundance is always defined in relative terms. By comparing the ratio of labor to capital in two countries, thus, no country is abundant in everything. Since clothes is the labor-intensive product compared with food, home's production possibility frontier relative foreign is shifted out more in the direction of clothes than in the direction of food. Thus, other things equal, home tends to produce a higher ratio of clothes to food because the countries only differ in the factor abundance for any given relative price of clothes, PC over PF. Home will produce a higher ratio of clothes to food, QC over QF, than foreign will, which also means home will have a larger relative supply of clothes. So home's relative supply curve lies to the right of foreign as star. Look at figure 1. Because we have assumed that the two countries have the same preferences, the relative demand curve RD will be the same for both countries. If there were no international trade, the relative price of clothes PC over PF would be lower in home than in foreign. That is, in the absence of trade, the equilibrium for home would be at 0.1, while the equilibrium for foreign would be at 0.3. when home and foreign trade with each other, because trade leads to a convergence of relative price. The relative price of clothes rises in home and declines in foreign. And the New World relative price of clothes is established at the point somewhere between the pre-trade relative price, say at point 2. Home becomes an exporter of clothes because it is labor abundant relative to foreign, and because the production of clothes is labor intensive relative to food production. The relative price of clothes is thus cheaper than that in foreign. Similarly, foreign becomes an exporter of food because it is capital abundant and because the production of food is capital intensive. The relative price of food is cheaper than that in home. These predictions for the pattern of trade can be generalized as the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem, named after the original developer of this model of trade. Heckscher-Ohlin theorem refers to that the country which is abundant in effect exports the good whose production is intensive in that fact. Third, trade and distribution of income. We can extend the 2 by 2 by 2 model to more realistic case, multiple countries, factors of productions, and the number of goods. Generally, we can say countries tend to export goods whose production is intensive in factors which the country are abundantly endowed. How the trade affect trade distribution with a trading relation in two-factor model. We have known that international trade will induce a convergence of relative price, and the changes in relative prices in turn have strong effects on the relative earning of labor and capital. A rise in the price of clothes raises the purchasing power of labor in terms of both goods, while lowering the purchasing power of capital in terms of both goods. A rise in the price of food has the reverse effect. In our example, home is an exporter of clothes because it is labor abundant. After trading with foreign, the relative price of clothes will rise. People who get their incomes from labor gain from trade, but those who derive their incomes from capital are made worse off. In foreign, trade results in the relative price of clothes falling. The opposite happens. Laborers were worse off, and the capital owners are better off. Thus, international trade can have a power effect on distribution of income, even in the long run. The resource of which a country has a relatively large supply is the abundant factor in that country, and the resource of which it has a relatively small supply is a scarce factor. For instance, labor is the abundant factor, and capital is scarce factor in home. So we can get the general conclusion about the income distribution effect of international trade. In the long run, owners of a country abundant factors will find their real incomes rising, and the owner of a country's scarce factors will find their real incomes fall. This conclusion is similar to to the one reached in the case of specific factors model. In the specific factor model, factors of production that are stuck in an important competing industry loss from the opening trade. But in the actual model, factors of production they are used intensively by the import competing industry are hurt by the opening trade. But regarding the aggregate gains from trade, the two models are identical. Opening to trade expands an economy consumption possibilities. So the trading nation gains from international trade as a whole. However, there is one crucial difference regarding income distribution effects in these two models. The specificity of factors to particular industries is often only a temporary problem. Garment makers cannot become computer manufacturers overnight, but given time, it can move. Thus, income distribution effects arise because labor and other factors of production are immobile, respect a temporary transitional problem. In contrast, effects of trade on the distribution of income among land, labor, capital are more or less permanent. In the real world, compared with the rest of the world, the United States is abundantly endowed with highly skilled labor, and low-skilled labor is correspondingly scarce. This means that international trade has the potential to make low-skilled workers in the United States worse off, not just temporarily, but on a sustained basis. We can see in the trade war between the US and China, lots of blue-collar support Trump's high tariff rate policy. According to actual model, the increased trade has potential effect on income inequality in advanced economies, such as the United States. It has been the subject of a large amount of empirical research in the area of international trade. In spite of the real importance of income distribution, most economists remained strongly in favor of more or less trade. There are three main reasons why economists don't generally suggest the income distribution effects of trade. The first is that income distribution effects are not specific to international trade. In fact, lots of facts can affect income distribution. For example, changes in technology, changes in consumer preferences, exhaustion of resources, and the discovery of new ones all affect income distribution, not only international trade. Economists put most of the blame on technological change and the resulting premium paid on education as the major cause of increasing income inequality. The second is that it would be better to compensate the losses from trade than prohibit trade, because the economy as a whole does benefit from trade. All modern industrial countries provide some sort of safety net of income support programs, such as subsidized training that cushion the losses of groups hurt by trade. The third is that those who stand to lose from increased trade are typically better organized than those who stand to gain. This imbalance creates a bias in political process that requires a counterweight, especially given the aggregate gains from trade. Most economists, while acknowledging the effects of international trade on income distribution, believe it is more important to suggest overall potential gains from trade than the possible losses to some groups in one country. That's all for this lecture. Thanks for your joining. See you next time.